you in my window, so I can't see the chat. So you might have to just.
Oh yeah, I'll do questions. Yeah, that's fine at the end.
Question, basically, keep a note of the questions and stuff.
Yeah, no worries.
Cool. Okay, I'll start then. Yeah. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're Code Computer Love for anyone that doesn't know us. And there's, I guess, this little intro into us. If anyone doesn't know what we're about, we're I guess a product and studio agency or studio. And we make products, we make services, and we basically use make change as our kind of like mantra. So we make things, and by virtue of making things, we're enabling organizations to change. So we change the products and services, and we often change them inside through the virtue of making an action. So that's as much as I'm going to kind of like say about code, but that gives you a bit of context as to why I'm going to be talking about design sprints. And today is all about, I suppose, the hidden challenges of running a design sprint. It's part of our Product Love series. Yeah, so I'll get cracking. So a few sort of house rules. If you want to, I guess, submit a question as I'm talking about things, we can use the chat in Teams, and Yain will be like looking out for the questions. And we'll probably just try and do like a round of questions towards the end. So this talk will be about 30 minutes-ish, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end to kind of just discuss questions. Yeah, and it'll be on YouTube as well to watch back, so don't worry about making notes and taking screenshots of screens and things like that. And then if you're joining us, well, yeah, if you're here, obviously, turn off your mic, please, so that don't get any like background noise and things like that. And it's up to you if you want to keep your video on. So that's it. That's the house rules. I think I've covered everything, Yain.
Yep, that's it, mate. All good.
Cool. Okay. Right. So hello. Onto the good stuff. So yeah, I'm Colin. I don't know. I just assume that people don't know me, and that's like a good way to be. I'm not some sort of famous designer. So I've been at Code Computer Love for quite some time, 14 years now, but I've got about 20 years in the industry, and I've had quite a few different roles, I suppose, like developing over the years, which has given me like a good sort of background to kind of where I am now. So I've come from like a junior designer into interaction, and my role has really evolved as the industry's evolved. So as UX has matured, so is my kind of role and my practice, up to the point of where I am now. So I've gone through senior designer, creative lead, and I've probably been leading design programs for maybe 7-ish years or so, 10 years-ish, in some shape or form. And obviously now I'm head of design, helping all the other guys and designers kind of running design programs and doing design sprints and all that kind of stuff. So I've got a few like stories underneath my belt of when things have gone well, and when they haven't gone so well, which is also really important because design's very rarely like this perfect process. So yeah, I spend a lot of time in workshops and design sprints, and today I'm just going to talk about some of those, I suppose, tips and things that I've learned from when they haven't gone well, because I think that's what nobody ever talks about. Because we're all familiar with this book, the Design Sprint book. It's been out probably quite some time now, and they're really good. Like they probably have like really kind of moved design forward quite a lot, significantly in terms of as like for a really good problem solving technique. But it's very rarely presented in a real view. Like we're all familiar with like social media nowadays, like people presenting this kind of almost like idealistic perfect view, like on the left, but then on the right you've got loads of stuff in the background to make that one moment happen really well. And I think design's a bit like that. Like you can post a picture of this kind of fantastic design process or a picture of a workshop happening, but then there's or like some designs at the end, but you know that there's been like a messy kind of design process to get there, and that's okay, that's real, and that's kind of what design's all about. So I think it's just more of a word of note of like, you might have read a book and you've got a theoretical process, but don't worry if your design process never works out like that. Like, it's not supposed to, it never does. So today I'm going to talk about the kind of like, I suppose design's great, design sprints are great, but, and I'm going to talk about those kind of like things that kind of make it potentially difficult, or challenges that we've, I suppose, overcome over the years, and things that we can do to kind of mitigate some of those things. So I guess first of all, it's sort of getting started in doing a design sprint in your organization, or if you're a studio or an agency, that could be quite difficult, or if you're an in-house team, there might be just a real lack of confidence in doing sprints. And maybe now there's lots of things written about design sprints, good and bad, and like maybe you've got some particularly strong stakeholders that just are dead against it. So starting it can be quite challenging, and I guess it's down to almost like the practitioners to kind of just really just do it, I suppose. And if I want to give you like insight into how we started, we were maybe like 5-6 years ago. We hadn't done any design sprints at Code. We were kind of comfortable with doing design work, doing workshops, and doing like chunks of design, but we hadn't really kind of thought about having a load of people in a room together to solve a problem. That was very new to us, and it was like, how do we convince a client to pay for it? Like, what do we get out of it? What's the point of it? So like, and I guess we as a design collective had to kind of like come up with those answers and kind of build confidence for everyone around us to kind of look at what we were doing for them to feel confident. And I guess what we did, we kind of just started learning instead of just doing it. Like, it's possible to start doing a design sprint without any experience. Like, we're not born experts. Like, somebody didn't just come on the scene and go, I can do design sprints really well. Now everyone else should do it. They've had to learn it as well. So what we did, we did the IDEO course. I think that's still going now, actually. It's the design kit IDEO course. So that's really nice, collaborative, online thing to do. We did some internal ones, like we picked some like internal like side projects to kind of just practice design sprints, to kind of practice what we'd learned. We didn't really make a big deal out of it at the start. We sort of did it under the radar, and we got quite a few different design sprints under our belt before we started to kind of like feel confident enough to be able to say we can do this for our clients, because we'd practiced it. And at the end of the day, actually, a design sprint, when you boil it down, is just a collection of workshops. Each day is like a long workshop. So a UX practitioner or designer or anyone in product really is like, you're equipped to be able to do it. It's just a series of connected workshops. So if you break it down to its parts, like individual parts, it's less scary. And I think we're all experts in all those stages. It's just bringing it together. So my advice there is just kind of just do it and just give it a go. And this was, I guess, an example of when we first started. This 2 offices ago. It was a long time ago, and we just got together and just did it. It's like make it collaborative, fun experience, and make it a safe experience, to kind of make it okay to fail. Like, if your first design sprint doesn't go well, it doesn't matter. And I think don't make it high risk, I suppose, is probably the takeout there. Yeah, and we kind of like enjoyed it. It was like really good, collaborative. It's like sketching. It looks like everyone's watching me sketch there, but in reality, like, everyone's doing stuff. And you can see how messy the desk is and the office is, and it's like that's just what it should feel like. Definitely not like this kind of exercise structured kind of thing. And I suppose once you've done that and like you feel comfortable doing design sprints, and everyone's like talking about it, and it's built up a buzz, and everyone wants to have a go, you've then got the opposite problem of like every piece of design or UX work almost gets put into a sprint. Excuse me. And then we lose the idea that actually design, you still need just like focused like time to actually do like research or production. Like, everything doesn't work in a sprint. And then I guess you might start to feel a little bit like the picture on the right, where you're just knackered and burnt out because maybe you've been doing back-to-back sprints. And it's definitely like not recommended to do that, like maybe 1 or 2 at the most together, and then you need like some downtime, a couple of weeks in between, because it is really physically and mentally like draining doing a design sprint. You don't realize that until you kind of experienced it, but you definitely can't like work out. It doesn't work like agile sprints, I suppose, is the point there. And that if people aren't aware of what design sprint is, it's not just a week of time that you just do it 1 week and then another week and then another week, and you just keep burning through the design sprint process. That's not what it's there for. It's like it's a method that you can slot into your your overall design program to help you figure out a particular problem. So the point of it is to kind of give you insights, not to do design production, if that makes sense. So it's about making sure you don't do like back-to-back design sprints, protect your creative thinking time, because you will get burnt out if you do that. Reserve it for the big problems that need that multi-collaborative kind of push, because that's what that design sprints are great for, bringing people together. It's not a replacement of someone just getting down and doing some design. And don't forget, you still need to do research and product and brand and content. All that needs to go into it. So again, like is in the context of an agile sprint, a design sprint won't just happen if you just book it in. It's like, oh, we're doing a design sprint next week. It's like, that's just not going to happen, which is actually my next point. The kind of consequence of design sprints being popular, I suppose, in your organization, or even clients may be asking for design sprints, or like your sales process of kind of like feel comfortable selling a design sprint because it's a nicely packaged piece of work. It's like it's easy to articulate and then get sold, and then it's coming in, and then you kind of like, it needs to be done tomorrow, and that's often something that can kind of like set you up in the wrong way, like if you're not prepared for it. So I think this is like a word of caution of like, don't try not to basically just continue with like a flawed plan. Like if someone said we need to do a design sprint tomorrow, don't just say yes, is my advice. Because ultimately, obviously, like you've got some real obvious kind of things there to say no on, in the sense of you've got to recruit people to test, and that can take time. You've got to lead time to kind of find some users. And ultimately, like if you're not really prepped, you haven't got the research and the insights going into a design sprint, that's going to really impact the quality of the outputs, I suppose. So like you got to, I suppose it's about being brave to kind of like say no or reschedule. So like, yeah, that's great that you want to do design sprint, but we need to do it next week or the week after. And so maybe just set up a lead time within your organization of like how long it takes to kind of get in, like start doing a design sprint. And ultimately, I suppose like a bad design sprint creates bad PR for you and your team, which nobody wants. And maybe that's like the cause of some of the bad press that maybe design sprints get out there, like people that maybe have experienced a bad design sprint and then think that it's not the answer to everyone's problems, is because it wasn't prepped properly, or it was rushed, or it just wasn't done correctly. So I think that's like I suppose, be bold and brave enough to kind of say no when you don't feel it's the right plan. And I suppose the next one, I've heard this a lot, because design sprints are often quite lo-fi, the process, and it's collaborative exercises around ideation and things like that. You might get stakeholders saying, "Oh, I could do that," like, and it's the age old, like, I can make a sketch, why am I paying for you to do this? And it's like, they don't necessarily understand the value of the design sprint as a whole. So this is kind of like touching on, you get out what you put in. And people in a design sprint can really shape and influence the experience within that sort of time frame. So I suppose the other sort of set of advice is like thinking about if you think about the people, the product, and the purpose, those 3 Ps, I suppose, easy enough to remember. A bit like when you think about a workshop, I suppose. If you haven't got them all aligned and understand, and the right people and doing it for the right reason, you've got like ingredients for it to kind of go wrong. As we know, like if you're in a workshop, so like if you've got the wrong people in a room, it can really kill it. So like if you've got really negative people and really pessimistic people in a sprint, like you're gonna have to really work on keeping their energy up all the time, and really work on being the counter kind of positive kind of, yes, we can do these things, versus, oh, we can't do that. So if you spot those people, those are the kind of people you have to really kind of work on. So being able to design the people you put into a sprint is really important. I guess let unproductive people leave the sprint in a nice way. So like sometimes people don't know what they're signing up for. We've seen this a lot with clients and things, like they like the idea of doing a design sprint and being part of the design process, but when they kind of like get to maybe day 2, when it's all about ideation and things, it's like, oh my God, this is just not for me. It's okay to kind of like let them go, like tap out, and maybe tap somebody else in. You know, like there's no point persevering with somebody that just isn't comfortable in the process. That's also okay.
Useful is if everything went into the same.
So was that a question? I'll carry on. And then I guess sprints are not client theatre as well. So it's like it's not an experience for the clients. Well, they shouldn't be like. It's not an experience for kind of like on a journey, so that they feel that they've been involved. But it should be very useful. It's not just like design theatre. And then I guess make sure you've got a strong and clear goal for the challenge. This is often the key thing that messes up a design sprint, because the design challenge is really woolly. Or really kind of too broad, and it's really hard, and it's hard for the collective to understand the point and the purpose of what they're trying to get out of it. So just like you would with a workshop, think about the end goal and then work backwards. So like you should have your design sprint challenge like agreed up front with the client, with the team, and everybody knows what they're doing as a statement going in. And then I guess think about an engaging way to onboard the team into the insights as well. So like it's easy to kind of we can do some lightning talks. That's in the book. Like everyone does like a 5-minute, 10-minute lightning talk, and then before you know it, you've spent like a whole morning of just listening to people talk about stuff, and you're brain dead. And it's like you're not really onboarded into it. Like think about methods and activities that you can do to kind of like get people to kind of distill it. So rather than like let's say you're doing like a share about like a talk about a product, or like some product cards, and you need to know about the spec of a product to be able to design about it. Rather than just talking about it, you could like do an activity around like split people off into pairs and kind of like and do like a little mini design challenge to kind of get them to extract out things that they think is important, present back to each other, and keep it kind of like fluid and active as a way of learning and onboarding into stuff. So I guess it's like tapping back into your school days of when you can think about what class was really interesting and what class was really boring. It's like the boring ones were where you were sat listening, and the interesting ones were like practical stuff where you were doing worksheets or like doing activities and working together. So that applies to every step, I suppose, even onboarding and sharing insights. So that's probably the advice there. So I suppose like the next one, I suppose tapping back into, obviously there's a really popular book out there, and there's lots of companies doing design sprints, lots of companies, I suppose, like talking about how to do it, and that's all good. It's brilliant. Like there's a wealth of resource out there. But it's also like don't be so dogmatic about like the process. It's like just because someone has said you must do this activity on day 1, you must do this activity on day 2, and this on day 3. It's like they should be seen as like guiding principles of what you're trying of how you should be working each day. So it's about, I suppose, it's about the journey, not the process, if that makes sense. So like design your sprints for the insights you need. So like make sure that you're not like, don't do activities for the sake of it because it's in a book. I suppose is the thing there. Just like you would do for a workshop. That's going to be my reoccurring theme. Like, think of it like a big workshop, and I suppose think and plan a sprint like you would, and work backwards. And it's really important to have the right skills in the room as well, just like you would in a workshop. Like if you're going to do a design sprint around interaction, it's useful to have a front-end developer in there, or if it's really content focused, have a content designer in there. To help kind of stretch maybe what you're thinking and how you might come up with ideas. And you can also like ask them to think about activities as well. So like you might think we all think we're like really great at facilitation. But if I was trying to think about how to come up with like some like interesting way to get a content designer to come up with ideas, I just ask them ideas and thoughts, and like get different multiple perspectives into how to run a design sprint. That's really cool. And don't automatically stick to the methods in the book. It's all about adaptation, I think, in my personal view. Just like you do in a workshop, like you can have a plan. It's like everyone says plan, which is absolutely true, but you have to plan to pivot and plan to change. So like you might have your first understand day kind of really well structured, and you've got everyone on board. You've finished your day one with all your hand-out reads, and it's all been themed. And then you go away, you come back the next day, and then you've got your divergent kind of like ideation process, and that might just completely go wrong because you've got loads of people in the room that just can't think, or they're like distracted. So then you might have to come with like different methods to extract out the ideas that you need, and that's absolutely fine. I think that's part of the design as you kind of, I suppose, develop, is having lots and lots of methods in your back pocket to be able to like flip out as and when you need them. Yeah, and it's about just not being dogmatic about the process, I would say. I mean, this is a common one actually, I think, for us. Like the day one in a design sprint, it's supposed to be all about unpacking the brief and sharing insights and getting broad alignment on the problem, or the kind of the intricacies of the problem that make up the bigger problem. So you'll have like a big design challenge that you've like agreed on, and then as you kind of unpack it, you'll have like little mini sort of themes of problems that make up the bigger one. And then I suppose the job of the sprint is like then picking those little mini challenges to then design around. What your first day or your understand day shouldn't be about like getting the kind of stakeholders on board with doing the design sprint in the first place, which sometimes happen. Like you might be engaged with a team in an organization, and they like engage with you, like doing the design sprint. They're fully on board with it. It's great. And then maybe they've invited other people within the business that don't know anything about it, or don't know anything about the project even. And like their first interaction with it might be like on your first day one. And what you don't want to be doing is then kind of like convincing them the point of the design sprint, or like the project, or like aligning them on to how they think. And it shouldn't be about stakeholder management, really. That's the kind of like the main point of this. So, and I guess maybe it's like worth thinking about doing a day zero, we call them, beforehand, to kind of get the people on board and understood about what the point of the design sprint is. And again, like if you've got any, I suppose, really senior stakeholders that got really kind of like a voice that's listened to or dominates, you can also like hear what they have to say, but then try and design them out as well. Like as you start learning about disruptive people, you can design the workshop around them, either like pair them off with other people, other disruptive people, or like say, thank you very much, we've got everything we need from you now, we can move on with the ideation process, we don't necessarily need you, that kind of thing. So it's about designing the experience with the people that's going to be productive, and rather than keeping the people that are going to be disruptive, if that makes sense. And I think, again, it's about being confident to be able to say that, because we own the process, I suppose, and we're trying to get something out of it. And if we don't think certain things in that process isn't going to work, then I think we should feel confident enough to be able to say we need to pivot or change, or like do something different. But I appreciate that can be quite hard to kind of like ask the CEO to kind of to leave. But I think it's, they're also busy people. I think as long as you kind of making them feel heard, and you've listened, and they've got something written on a post-it, and their peers have listened, you can take that on and kind of work with it, I suppose, rather than disrupting it. And then the next one is a challenge for the designers specifically, I would say, like as a collective of people. We tend to want to, when you get into a sprint and you're maybe in your latter days, like in your converge and prototype day, it's really easy to kind of like want to design the whole thing and build the whole thing, because you kind of in that mindset, you kind of think about the whole thing. But and for fidelity as well, like it's really easy to kind of just naturally flow into like designing a finished page, rather than like keeping it lo-fi. So it's all about being really clever, I suppose, with like the fidelity you pick and the moments you decide to prototype, because ultimately, again, like design sprint is about identifying the really tricky areas in an experience and prototyping those things, because those are the things that you want to learn about the most. So I spend most of my time like reining people back in a design sprint. Like you don't need to design up how a form interaction works, because that's usability testing that can be done at a later stage. But actually the value of this sprint is to learn about that moment in that later on. So it's like you have to kind of like say it's that moment, and that's what we're going to prototype. and then you build your scenarios around them. So it's like it's being brave, because maybe the client was expecting a full designed experience, and again you have to kind of like say that's not going to happen. We're going to have some insights on parts of the experience. So I suppose like the sort of takeout there is like building your test plan as you go throughout the day. So I suppose as even on your first day when you've got your themed how might read, you could probably start to think about what are the assumptions that you're already starting to make, maybe about what you need to do or what you might want to ideate around, and start to collect those assumptions. Definitely have your scenarios, and you can start like almost crafting your test script from day 2, day 3, so it doesn't get to the end of day 4 when you've made your prototype and then you've got to then start writing a script. You can be doing it in tandem so that your prototype matches the script, and it's like a bit like chicken and egg a little bit, but you want to do them in tandem so that you make sure that they match, because there's nothing more stressful than getting to like the end of the day on your prototype day and then realizing, oh my god, we don't have the script written, we don't know how to test it, and we've got testers coming tomorrow. That's really stressful. So like make sure you've got somebody like responsible for that in your sprint. And I suppose another thing that we've learned working with organizations, like really big organizations, is that they often will often go a lot slower than the design sprint process. And obviously we built in like I suppose a mechanism to allow our sort of like people that we're engaging with to kind of go back to their wider business to collect feedback on the ideas. So we generally start on a Wednesday. So we do like Wednesday's the understand day, Thursday's the diverge day, where we've got and we'll have like all the ideas at the end of Thursday, and we package that up. So then on the Friday, our client can then like share their ideas with their peers, their bosses, and whoever they need to speak to, get some sort of feedback on those ideas. And then you've got the weekend also to kind of let those percolate. So like protecting that creative time and thinking time. And then on the Monday, everyone's refreshed. They've got feedback on the ideas. And then it's like Mondays they converge and focused on making the thing. So it's still focused, but it just builds in, I think, a bit of a break is really useful, I think. Just helps make sure that you're on the right tracks as well. Just to kind of like make sure that, because it's the worst thing you want to do is like plow on and design an experience that the client just disagrees with potentially. So it's always good to kind of build in that feedback session. And I suppose the other thing is like feedback's signals. So like you might have got, let's say, 40 ideas that you've sent to the client of like moments within an experience, and they've voted on 10 that they really like. And those are the 10 core ideas that you're going to put into your experience. You might prototype 5 of those things, but it's not to say that all the ones that didn't get voted on can't be used. Like those things can kind of be peppered in. So it's like, yeah, treat it as signals, and it's not a like hard, fast kind of things. It's like it's still fluid and evolving in terms of like what you're making. So yeah, I think that's that point really. And then what's this? I suppose this was a talking and thinking a lot, sort of like in the old world, let's say, like pre-pandemic, where a lot of physical experiences. Some of you might have been very comfortable in doing like remote design sprints beforehand. That's something that we had to kind of really get our teeth into, is it's the kind of remote side of it. And the thing that we kind of didn't expect really was like, we obviously recognize design sprints are taxing, but like remote design sprints are even more taxing. Like it's more energy sapping, I would say. Because just looking at a screen for like a long time, like 10 till 4, let's say, you kind of in a normal workshop day, and you're focused in a screen, it's draining. Like I suppose we've all probably experienced being on Zoom calls back to back for the day, and it's like a workshop and a design sprint's meant to be fun and energizing and creative and kind of like exciting, and then all of a sudden it's like you've taken that experience and put it like boxed it up into like this kind of like screen window. It's like you have to try and think about making that different. So they, and just like porting your offline experience and turning that into remote doesn't quite work. Like we've had to sort of like really sort of change up the structure a little bit. So like in terms of the exercises that we do, it's like we have to do a lot shorter exercises, broken up more regularly with like breaks and energizers to kind of keep the energy going. So like previously we might have done like an hour slot on a thing and then have a break. Now we do it more like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and kind of keep a regular rhythm of like energizers going. We've shortened it down so we don't do fuller days. Like might do like an extended morning or like 10 till 3 or 2 or something like that, just because your brain's just fried by the end of it. We use Miro a lot in our remote sprints. I think Miro and Mural probably the popular tools. And I think what we tend to do is like we'll use Miro and we'll have all the kind of days sort of planned out. But what we found is like when we plan it all out, and we're on day 1, you'll get people like wandering off to like day 4, day 5, day 6 and looking at stuff and not really following you and like skipping ahead or whatever. So what we tend to do is like we'll have it all planned out and ready, but we'll cover it and lock it so the focus remains on the day or even the activity that you're on. So even hiding like the afternoon's activities. So that helps with keeping focus, because you really can't stop individuals doing their own thing when they're in their own living room. Like they'll go off camera, they'll go on mute, and you really don't know if they're making a brew, looking at doing emails. It's just impossible. Like you might pretend, like you might say like, yeah, we're gonna like do whatever we can to kind of get everyone fully engaged, but you just got to accept that everybody won't be fully engaged all the way. And I think taking silence as acceptance is good. And then we kind of set tasks beforehand, so like we get our participants comfortable with the tools before the day of the tools. So we try not to kind of like teach them how to use Miro or make sure they can take pictures and upload them like on the day, so that all that's done ready beforehand. And I suppose what we've started to do now is like hybrid design sprints, which this is a picture of. So like some of us were in the office together in a room, and then some of the clients and some of our peers, colleagues were remote at home. So we like tried to figure out how that would work. So as you can see, we kind of like ultimately you have to think like remote first. So even though you might have more people in the room, like interacting, like say you have one remote person, you have to design the sprint and the experience for that remote person. So we updated everything in Miro. We used Miro as our place for everything, and we had like one webcam kind of pointing to us, so all our faces were available. Then you had a facilitator that was like guiding the process in Miro. So the physical interaction was just us working on a desk, sketching and stuff. So it's more like collaborative. And I think you have to be more proactively like engaging with the individuals that are remote. So like calling out someone's name and talking to them directly, like as well if they were sat next to you, so if that makes sense. So you have to really try harder when you've got fewer remote people than physical. So yeah, thinking remote first is a good mindset to have to make it inclusive. And I suppose if you got to the point where it's like you really you haven't started design sprints, or you kind of struggling, or you kind of maybe had a bad experience, just kind of like do a solo sprint and do it yourself, and just keep practicing doing design thinking in your own program of work, and just get comfortable with doing it. So like unpacking a problem, diverging and ideating, thinking big picture, as well as thinking detail, and then using guerrilla testing as a way to kind of like get your peers and people around you to kind of like see the value of testing. So like you could do like some remote testing with your colleagues, for example, or obviously I'm not going to advocate going out into the public just yet, but there's ways around it. If you was in that process, if you're at the start of that journey, you could kind of just do guerrilla testing with like staff and things like that. And I suppose don't be too tempted to get into Figma too early. It's probably the kind of like advice for if you were just starting out. It's feel really tempted to kind of get into making something as quick as possible, but just follow the day's process. I think that's it. I think that's my words of wisdom in 37 minutes. Hopefully I haven't rambled too much and you found something of use. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody and see questions.
I'll mute. If anyone does have any more questions, feel free to ask Col directly, or you can drop them in the chat. Roger has asked a question. Col, can you see that?
Yeah. Would it be useful to split people in groups during a sprint? Yeah, I think if you've got lots of people, that's I suppose another to think sprint. How many people in there? So I would always say between no more than 10 as a whole. Then you need and no fewer than 6 probably. So with 6 and 10 is a good amount of number. So if you've got less than 6, it's hard to kind of create that volume of ideas in your diverge day. But if you've got more than 10, it's really difficult to get feedback and keep it pacey. So if you imagine you've got 10 people doing 10 minutes, talking 10 minutes or 5 minutes about their idea, and then another 5-10 minutes about feedback, it all adds up quickly. It becomes really time consuming. But in terms of splitting people up into groups, yes, definitely. You could do half and half and then mix it up, and that's a good way of managing stakeholders as well. If you've got tricky, opinionated people, you can move them about, and you've got excuses to move them about then. Any more questions? So the last one. How do you know how big or small a question to put into the sprint as the starting stimulus from the entire new product strategy down to a simple feature? Yeah. So I think it needs to be broad enough. So it's a bit of a trial and error in the sense of it needs to be broad enough to allow for lots of to kind of keep you ideating around, but not too focused. I'm trying to think of an example. So for example, if we was working with a company, let's say a holiday park, and they wanted to kind of completely transform the digital experience from online to booking, and then the experience you have in the holiday village or whatever, and they've engaged with us to kind of how might we digitally transform our customer experience, let's say. That's a massively open-ended design challenge, and that's the program of work that you're going to engage with them, and that's probably a year's worth of work. That's not something you would then take into a design sprint. The design sprint, you'd have to have done a lot of work to kind of unpick the things that are part of that design sprint, the design challenge. So you might have done some research and you've done an experience map. You might have identified a slice of what we really need to do is have some sort of digital experience on site to help people book activities, let's say. That's an identified design challenge. But the complexity is you don't know what it should be or how it should work. Will people even use it online, whilst they're on the holiday, that kind of thing. You don't know what interactions it should be. So that could be a design sprint, a challenge you take into a design sprint, how might we engage with customers or users or holidaymakers on site to book activities. So it's a more of a focused design sprint challenge, but it's still open-ended enough to give you flexibility. I suppose you just have to keep kind of crafting it and writing out the statements and practicing it. It's probably best to start off with focused design sprint challenges as a try first. If you're just starting out, give it a bit more focus. No problem.
Okay, cool. I think that's right on time, actually. So thanks everyone for joining. Cole will actually be doing a second session next month on how we sort of use day zeros to onboard new partner relationships. So that invite will go out if anyone's interested in that one as well. But thanks all for coming along and for taking part, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
Thanks everyone.
Cheers, Code.
Thank you.